Let me introduce Rabbi Hyman. Rabbi Peter Hyman, a lifelong scout and volunteer, he serves as the chair of the Messengers of Peace Committee for the Boy Scouts of America and is also the BSA Jewish National Jewish Chaplain. A member of the Religious Relationships Task Force, he chairs the Chaplaincy Subcommittee and has served on the chaplaincy staff of many national and international Scout jamborees. Hyman is an Eagle Scout and a recipient of the Silver Buffalo Award and the proud father of 2 Eagle Scouts. As a clergy person, as a scout, and as a messenger of peace, he engages with the issues of environmental stewardship and sustainability from both a theological as well as a societal perspective. So Peter's going to moderate this panel. You've met Dr. Sleeth. Brian Heller, many of you have met around the table and professionally, but I want to formally introduce Brian. Brian spent 22 years in the Navy. From everything from a sub base to running entire base operations. And when his career concluded there, he was hired by Admiral McCarthy, Dan McCarthy, to join the summit, where he is responsible for all facets of facility management, for structures, infrastructure systems, the dams, all the adventure elements at the summit. The BSAs, those of you who have not been to the summit, hopefully you're going on the tour tomorrow. It's a 10,600 acre national high adventure base that's 1 hour from where you're sitting right now. Brian is also responsible for overseeing all the sustainability efforts and the environmental efforts, as well as capital improvement projects and coordinating future development. And I know for the next 100 years we'll be developing that property, so you will be there for a long time. But the backstory on Brian, I had an opportunity to go spend time with President David Beck from the LDS Church, and was asking him why the LDS Church is so committed to all their temples and buildings being LEED Gold and better. And he shared about their philosophy and their theology, and it was so in line with the conversation today. And President Beck offered to come to the conference and then had a conflict, and we had a number of names, and he blessed and endorsed Brian to come speak on behalf of the church and his own personal faith, but also to represent the LDS faith. So please welcome, and Joel, sorry Joel, you weren't in my lineup right there. And Joel gets the flowery introduction at lunch when he's doing his keynote, but I had an opportunity to go to Polyface Farms. And Joel, if you've read your bio, Joel's recognized as one of the most innovative farmers in America. And when I had an opportunity to visit Polyface Farms and the way they're doing farming, he was going through and you'll learn about Polyface, but he was going through the process, and the gleam in his eye, when scientifically you ask, how does this happen? How does this happen that the chickens are following the cows? And you go through all the process of what's the science behind this? And he smiles and goes, this is the way God created it. And so you have to be part of this conversation as well. And you toil the soil and tend animals and care for life and a champion for local food, and all of it's done through the eyes of creation. So I'm excited about this panel. Let's welcome the participants and Rabbi Hyman.
Thanks, boss. Just a couple of opening remarks. First, my mother has a number of reasons to be proud. Both her grandsons are Eagle Scouts. My father was a Scoutmaster. But one of her sons is a doctor, and that gives him great credibility. So I get it. That's fine. We all understood that. I'm Rabbi Peter E. Hyman, and I'm a messenger of peace. Oh, thank you. I want to talk about his introduction to this, and I'm not going to talk long, but I want to talk about his introduction to this, the word peace. Anybody know the word peace in Hebrew?
Shalom.
Okay. Anybody know the word peace in Arabic? Close. Salam. The word peace, both in Hebrew and in Arabic, come from a 3-letter root. In the Hebrew is Shin Lamed Mem. It doesn't mean peace. The word salam and the word peace mean wholeness, completeness. You can't have peace in yourself, in your community, or in the world if it's broken. We're going to talk a minute, and Doctor, your words were moving. We are going to talk about and entertain a discussion on the biblical basis for ecological responsibility and the imperative for sustainability. Let me suggest also that in the book of Ecclesiastes it says there is nothing new under the sun. We are not the first generation to confront this. I would offer and suggest that the entire Bible, not to go back and rehash, but is the first, especially Genesis and Exodus, that's the first documented sustainability report. And let me just share two texts with you before we open it up. I want to talk about a text that you're probably less familiar with, and then one that you're probably really familiar with. The first text is from the book of Exodus, the 25th chapter, where God says to Moses, "Tell them to build me a tent, a tabernacle." Anybody know what the tabernacle is called in Exodus besides the tabernacle? It's called the tent of meeting. What meeting takes place there? Well, just listen. "And have the people bring me gifts whose hearts are so inclined, that I may dwell among them." That's the first text, Exodus 25. Build me a tabernacle, this tent of meeting, that I may dwell among them. It doesn't say that I'm going to live there. It says that the tent of meeting is where God will dwell among us. And then the second text is from the book of Genesis. You know it probably. And God saw all that was made and found it tov ma'od, very good. What does it mean when God says it's very good? Think about that. What do these two things have in common? What are these two texts? Why did I link these two texts? I linked them because the tent of meeting, they didn't go there to play mahjong and have bagels on Sunday morning. They went there to encounter God. The tabernacle is a metaphor and an image for the universe. We encounter God in the universe. The Israelites encountered God in the tent of meeting. What we do to the universe implies what we think about God. When BP, Baden-Powell, created the foundation of a worldwide, world-transforming institution, scouting across the globe, concomitant with that innovation, he developed a theology. It is a non-religion specific theology. And BP's theology was simply this: how a scout does duty to God is how a scout does to the world, to nature, to the environment. Two more points. I was moved last night. The last slide that Sir Robert had on the screen said, "Our survival on earth is not someone else's problem." There is a rabbinic story that I'm going to share with you, and then I'm going to be quiet. God is in the garden, and he takes Adam, and he shows Adam all the trees of the garden. And God says to Adam, "Look at my work. How lovely are all these trees and all these things. All that I've created for you. Take care not to destroy or corrupt my universe. For if you destroy it, no one will come after to put it right." This is sustainability. The imperative for what we are doing reaches all the way back to the very beginning, certainly of Genesis and probably before, but certainly Genesis. One last comment. When our two Eagle Scouts talked about Amazon and the oil and the Antarctica and the global warming. One last midrash, one last story. A woodsman goes into the forest to ask the trees to give him wood for his axe handle. And it seemed a modest request. and the big strapping oak trees, the principal trees, agreed to it. And then the mighty oak and the mighty cedar decided that the unpretentious ash tree could furnish what the axeman wanted, the handle. And no sooner had the woodsman fitted the handle to his axe, he began chopping down all the trees. And the oak whispered to the cedar, "Our first concession has lost us all. If we had not been willing to sacrifice our humblest neighbor, we ourselves might have stood for ages." I begin with that thought, this panel. Questions, comments to any one of us? You're stunned. I don't blame you. Brian, why don't you start then?
Okay, one might ask what might be the LDS perspective or the Latter-day Saint perspective on sustainability. I was thinking about this and thinking of, one of the big metaphors that we have is the beehive. You'll see in Utah beehive all over the place because we aspire to be an industrious people. However, when I think about sustainability, the one word that really pops up to me is stewardship. And that has been said throughout the last day and a half over and over again. But in the LDS Church, we don't have a paid ministry, and every active member of the church is given a responsibility and given a stewardship over that responsibility and expected to carry out that responsibility. And stewardship is ingrained into our culture almost as if it was there from the beginning. And when you think about it, and it's been alluded to a couple times, it has been since the beginning. In fact, in Genesis 1:28 through 30, indulge me as I read a minute, and God's talking about Adam and Eve, and he says, "And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, Behold, I give you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree," here's your tree, "in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat." And it was so. In these verses, God gives us stewardship. It is up to us to keep track of this earth, to make it good, not to destroy it. And despite the fact that we are required and must be industrious, we have to do it in the right way that takes care of the planet. All of us, or most of us, have children. I can't imagine making this earth worse for my sons and daughters than it was for me. It's important to me for my faith, for my beliefs, that I'm giving something to my children. I want my children to have every opportunity I had and more. So that's important to me. And I think, as I really enjoyed yesterday, Cynthia talking about the people-based sustainability. Sometimes as I've grown up, and I keep thinking, okay, we're reaching the kids, but how do we reach the old people? I grew up in a transition phase, I think, where the environment was being taught. But I was kind of led to the feeling that people didn't count. Well, what about me? I'm an animal. I need to have stuff too. And I really I think that's kind of the difference between the environmentalist movement and the sustainability movement, is that it's incorporating people, incorporating the importance of people. And we have to figure out how people can fit into the world. And that's where, you know, much of the theology really helps ingrain into this, is because we're here, God gave us the earth, but we must take care of it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm a pretty practical guy, so I'll just tell a little bit of what we've seen on our own farm. My brother raises bees. We have about 17 hives on the farm. You mentioned bees. That's what made me. I'll go to that. Let's be very practical. And many of you, and bees are kind of a canary. They're a keystone kind of thing. And many of you probably aware that many bees are dying. There's colony collapse disorder. There are all sorts of things. And so we're not experiencing that at our farm. The bees are they're swarming every year. I mean, you know, they're just healthy enough to, you know, swarm, which is their ultimate launching a new hive. So I was talking to my brother about this, and he said, "Here's the deal." He's an airplane mechanic by profession, so he's an engineer, you know, very researchy, specific. And he said, "Here's the deal. Most of the hives in the U.S. are moved around. You see them on tractor trailers. They're moved for pollination, because 1 in 3 bites of food that we eat requires a bee. Ultimately, 1 in 3 bites of food that we eat requires a bee behind it. So just take 1/3 of all the food off the table, and you'll see what happens, you know, when there's a bee problem. Well, so the agriculture community moves these bees around, you know, to orchards and alfalfa fields and canola fields and that sort of thing. And I don't know how you'd feel to have all of your belongings, your house, your orientation, your geography, your place of living. I'm not sure how you'd survive being moved about every 6 to 8 weeks. I know for me it'd be pretty stressful, you know, to like, you know, every 8 weeks wake up in a different part of the country, and not know where the mechanic shop is, and where, you know, you get things, and where you get your chainsaw fixed and stuff. So the bees are being transported by the hundreds of thousands of hives, thousands of miles, on a very fast rotation, because there aren't enough bees in a certain locale to handle the huge amount of pollination that has to be done with a single crop in a single area. What I'm trying to get to is that the colony collapse problems and the bee problems are largely a result of a monocropping, monospeciation system, which does not have enough diversity on the landscape to maintain a relatively calm, normal, indigenous bee population. In fact, right now, I just got this confirmed this week. I've been doing several speeches around and been in some urban areas, urban farming, and it's now statistically in the bee industry that the most productive, healthy hives are in cities, because there is a continuing bloom horticulturally, you know, gardens and flowers and ornamentals. So in a city, there's a lot of you know, pollen to feed the bees all the time. And so urban beehives, there's just an explosion of urban beekeeping now. There's a whole book on from Paris to New York. I mean, they're all over the place, and they're currently saving bees in the urban sector, because in the farming sector, not me, but we as a farmer have gone to a monospeciated, monocropping, industrial, mechanically based idea in such a scale that the bees can't find a home all the time. And what does it say about a food and farming system if the created being to maintain procreation can't find a home?
Good point. Where's your farm?
It's in Virginia. We're only like an hour and 45 minutes away. So after the summit tomorrow, everybody can just drive over to. Oh no, you've got tickets out of Charleston. Sorry. Anyway, we're not very far. We're over in the Shenandoah Valley.
Very nice. Doc, anything?
I didn't know the conversation would go to bees, but of course the state of Utah's, the symbol has a beehive there, and you're talking about really monoculture, and because these hives starve once that pecan tree stops. But of course I'm always trying to tie things to faith and Scripture, and in Scripture we find that when the land is disturbed, the bees are on the ground in Chronicles and Kings. So this is not a new barometer.
Right, right.
Before there were canaries in coal mine, there were bees in agriculture, and so
that's what the Ecclesiastes text means, that there's nothing new under the sun. We're not the first to wrestle with this. Let me ask a question. Let me ask this. What does it mean? Brian quoted the full text of Genesis 1:28. What does it mean to have dominion over something? Anybody know where the word dominion comes from? Dominus, Lord. Very good. You passed my class. You passed the test. There is a difference between lording over something and being godlike. The Genesis text does not mean that we are to lord over it. That's not our job. We weren't created to do that. This concept of stewardship, without the realization that dominion means that we are to reflect God, that we are to act as God's representatives, is probably one of the most misunderstood biblical concepts among the many that are misunderstood all the time. I think that's an important takeaway. How many of you go to Sunday school or have been to Sunday school, either Saturday, Sunday, Wednesday, or whenever? How many of you read the Genesis text? Okay. How many of you understand what Genesis really means?
yeah.
Maybe. All right? All religious literature is agenda-driven and politically oriented. All. Yours, mine, theirs, and ours. There is an agenda to the text, and the agenda to the Genesis text, certainly the creation narrative, or the first 12 chapters anyway, 10, 11 chapters, is to set a dynamic between human beings and the world and the universe that we occupy. That's why it says dominion, not to lord over, but to have some sense of consonance with, serving as God's stewards.
I'm just sitting here thinking of some of John alluded to, some of the churches and temples that are lead gold and things, and I was just sitting here thinking of if you ever go around an LDS temple, you'll find some of the most beautiful garden work you've ever seen. Almost any time of the year. In fact, you go there in April in Salt Lake City and you go, how do they get the flowers going?
And they never use 10-10-10. It's all compost?
I don't know how they're doing it, to be honest.
Just wondering.
But what I was about to say, when you go across the street now to the conference center that was built in Salt Lake, the LDS Church has kind of grown out of its old buildings, out of the tabernacle that the choir is named after. They have a 21,000-seat auditorium, which is phenomenal. It's just an engineering and architectural marvel. But on the top of that is 3 acres of native grasses and trees.
Yeah.
To reduce the heat load in that building naturally and provide if you will, a park in downtown Salt Lake City that people can go to. And they found while they're constructing a creek or a spring coming out of the ground. And they're like, well, what are we going to do with this? You know, for most of us engineers, that's a problem. So what did they do with it? Well, they routed the water up to the roof, and that is now, I think, a 67-foot cascading waterfall that comes out of the spire and down into a creek that they kept above ground. You know, most of us in the city push the water streams underground. Well, now they have a stream running by it. They have the grasses on the top and the water flowing, and it creates a touch with nature that brings you to your faith and provides peace. I think it's absolutely important for people to be able to get out in nature and breathe clean air. I'm from Nevada originally, the polar opposite of Utah, if you will. But you know, nothing was going to bring me out to the East Coast when I retired from the Navy, but the summit did, because it's an opportunity to be outside. I realized all of my favorite activities took me outside. When I wanted to relax, I didn't go read a book. That's what my wife does. I go outside and I love to do something adventurous outside. And I love being able to go out into the trees and spend time out there, and I feel close to my Heavenly Father when I'm outdoors, and confirms my faith.
Well, you know, I think too, the Genesis narrative, I get your point about, you know, do we really know all the nuances? You know, I've written several books, and people, you go to visit their farms. I'm doing just like you, and they're doing 180 degrees opposite what I do. And you realize that if people are that quick to misinterpret something in our own culture, in our own day, in our own language, how easy is it for us to miss something that was written long ago in a different culture, in a different. And anyway, but what I was trying to get to was that Matthew mentioned the tension in your, and I'll allude to this a little bit in my keynote, but what we've got is the environmental movement essentially grew out of a kind of John Muir, Leopold, the French Bysshe, Shelley, Keats, the French Romantic poets, and everything as beautiful as a tree, and a very creation worshiping ethic. And in the faith community, you know, there's a tremendous tension, I think, as we try to bring creator worship and separate ourselves. We should be the ones who are touting we're fearfully and wonderfully made and appreciating the magnificence of creation. And so I kind of see Genesis as you know, God's always into object lessons. I mean, we're so daffy. We can't understand spiritual concept. We can't understand what's beauty, what's forgiveness, what's abundance, what's grace. You know, these are great concepts, but how do you see it? Well, God made a world, made a planet, and then surrounded us with a physical manifestation. And so the question we ask everybody on our farm is, so how do we have a farm that manifests forgiveness, that when visitors come and they leave this, now I know what forgiveness is. Oh, now I know what mercy is. Oh, now I know. You know, that's what the physical universe is all about, is a visceral object lesson of divine concept. And we can see it.
Absolutely. And on that note, we will conclude, and we thank you.
No.
Oh.
No, we're good. We wanted to ask questions.
Oh, I thought you. I thought I had. Never mind.
The sign. I'm sorry. That was the sign.
I can continue speaking for several hours.
I know
it's
you
not
can.
a problem.
I was trying to give you the baseball sign. That was not the cut sign. That was we have questions
Oh.
sign. I know my friend Bob has a question, but before I have a question as well. So one of the things, first off, this is a thrilling conversation. One of the things that President Beck said to me that just really, hit me at the end of our conversation, he said, John, God's plan is sustainable. And he said everything about God's plan is sustainable. And one of the conversations we got into was about branding. And it is, when I think about the Boy Scouts of America, and a majority of people think about the Boy Scouts of America or across the country, they have an iconic Norman Rockwell painted version of the 50s of boys in uniform, doing scouting. And I had made this comment to President Beck that the LDS Church faces the same type of image problem. The simple fact that there's a new temple that's being opened in Indianapolis, Indiana, where I live, and where we are in our scouting area, and when that building opens, it will automatically be one of the greenest buildings in the state of Indiana. And the question is, how are you? Is the church using those 3 days of preview before the temple's sealed to invite people in the community who are interested in that? Because that is a very relevant way. The Jewish faith. Whenever I go by the Jewish Community Center in San Francisco and what they're doing with homeless and what they're doing through community, CSA community farms and different ways to feed people and action. And I think about, especially in the Christian evangelical faith, when so many people are turned off by who they see on TV preaching or whatever the latest book that people are selling to build their own self-image and things, can you each talk about just the branding aspect of it? How can sustainability in the environment be a way to rebrand within your own faith to draw more people to the church?
Branding, interesting. Well, I think that, like it or not, default, I'm often the representative for Christianity in a particular setting. And I think in culture, everyone believes they know what Christians are against. And they're a little foggy on what we're for. My boss's parting instructions were to love one another. And I think particularly in a generation coming up, to feel that my generation doesn't love them enough to hand them the resources to have access to everything that we had isn't very loving. So I would really like to see the church, or at least my branch that I represent, known for what it's for. And I think it was mentioned that the Bible is a book for sustainability. The lines that unroll through the Bible and echo of God interested in wanting to bless 1,000 generations. And Malachi, the book of Malachi closes with that. And then when Mary is told that she's with child, she immediately says 3 times about generations in the future. So God's a long-term thinker, and we're short-term thinkers. But even if we're representing the Boy Scouts, that's a relatively new organization. We belong to a very old organization, and you belong to the oldest branch that there is. So to bring that long-term thinking and sustainability, I think, is divine in this setting.
Well, I feel a little bit out of place to be on the stage with guys that do this for a living. But, to say we should rebrand, I think, when I think about what I typically get responses of, hey, so you're a Mormon. Do you wear a white shirt all the time? I happen to be today. But, there are a lot of resources that can help someone learn about what the church is doing, and they are making immediate, I don't want to call it a blitz, but very conscious efforts to help people understand. You can go to Mormon.org and learn about the church. You can go, in fact, there's a website called providentliving.org that really teaches a lot of really basic things that someone can learn to do, most of the sustainability things that were not really thought of before sustainability became a key word. In other words, we've talked about the Boy Scouts being green to deep green because we were green before green was cool or whatever. A lot of the concepts of sustainability have been taught in the LDS Church for many, many, many decades. And now we have an opportunity with multimedia to bring those things out.
And I will comment on one thing about Provident Living that I have learned. And I appreciate you sharing that website, because I had asked one of my LDS scouting friends, I said, why is, those of us who are not LDS faith and in scouting are usually envious of, wow, you don't have the recruitment problems because all the boys are in the program. And And I had asked him one time, why is it so important? He says, well, you have to realize scouting to us is one step to making a great man, a man who loves his family, who is a good citizen, who is, you're looking at the long range plan. And the Provident Living, when I went to the website, went through it, sustainability is important to the church, but it's part of Provident Living. It's not the focus and not the goal, and the goal is Provident Living. And so, I appreciate you sharing that. That's a great point for those of us who are not of the Mormon faith to understand.
I think the tension that I see in our faith community and for me is visceralizing your cerebral understanding. And I think we're really good at, having focus group discussions about spiritual concepts. We're not very, and we have this wonderful compartment for the catechism and the choir and the praise songs and and the good homiletics and all. I mean, we got that. That's a good compartment. But we don't do a good job at saying, okay, what does that look like in the decisions that I make today? Whether it's from what do I put on the menu to where I invest my money, to where I take the kids, whatever, we don't do a good job at actually, I don't know if it's a word, but English is fun, you can play with it, physicalizing this theological cerebral thing that we spend time on. We have a really hard time. It's called compartmentalization, and this was, of course, a Western reductionist, linear, compartmentalized, systematized, fragmentized, disconnected, individualized, parts-oriented kind of thinking, which made Francis Schaeffer beg the question, how shall we then live? Because he was tired of it too. And I think all of us wrestle with it, and I think some of us, maybe that come out of conservative faith backgrounds, wrestle with it more than others because we're so proud of our catechistic heritage.
That's on. Yeah, I had a question for the group, and actually it's interesting that John asked this one sort of about organizational branding related to this, because then as Matthew was speaking, I was thinking, the content and construction of this gathering to me has just been remarkable in every way. But then there was something that Matthew said, and I thought, well, there's a topic we really haven't hit on yet, and I'd love to ask this question to just kind of get personal experience from these guys, because this takes the subject from sort of that organizational level to a personal level. And Matthew, I couldn't quite catch your comment when you said it, so I rewrote this in my own words. As you said that, I wrote, living sustainable principles with kindness, humility, a teachable spirit, and respect for different opinions and life experiences is a more effective personal testimony than engaging others from a sense of pride or superiority. There was that concept that you had offered, but I was thinking about that because we haven't really touched on that subject here. It reminded me of one of our national board members who, a year or so ago, as we were wrestling with a major issue and talking about ways that we address change, he had the wisdom of very simply saying, Bob, the best change comes from internal rather than from external, and from internal commitment rather than external coercion. So I just wonder if that's kind of a general subject that any of you have life experience you want to speak to.
A thought as you read that, and I wished I'd said it as eloquently as you rewrote it, but I'll take credit for it. I was in a library, the main library in Dallas, a number of years ago, maybe 7 years ago, and talking to environmental groups, and read from my Bible. I carry in a pocket the Beatitudes, and these are, blessed are the poor, etc. And just read that, and afterwards a woman came up to me and she said, I've never actually heard those read, and I've never read them myself, and I didn't realize that Jesus specifically addressed the environment in the Beatitudes. And I thought to myself, I didn't realize that he did either, but I'm diplomatic, so I said, how did it speak to you? and she said, oh, well, the meek will inherit the earth, and by definition, unless we become more meek, we will not inherit the earth. And so I learned something on that day. I think that Christ is, for me, is always calling me to a higher standard and asking me personally, how should I to live out my faith and where I shop, etc. One thing I don't have time to get into, and this is the only plug I'll make here, which I'll do in my later session, and everybody gets a free book if you come. But having done this environmental work through the lens of faith now for well over a decade, having gotten to preach at the National Cathedral a dozen times on it and work with all these seminaries, I really think there's a next place to go. I was at the Billy Graham Center. I've been there a couple of times this year teaching groups. I've brought all the Wesleyan military chaplains there to teach. And every light bulb is compact fluorescent or LED. Every single one at the Billy. So check, it's done. The question is, where do we go in a sustainable faith for those of us of faith? And I'm very interested in that. And I think the real battle for this next generation is about time. They simply don't have time for the Scouts. They don't have time to be outdoors. They just, and for me, the only answer in how to begin to think about time in a holy way, because it's the first time in Scripture that the word holy is used, is in connection with Sabbath. And so I believe that the real challenge for a lot of young people today is, are they going to be essentially virtual slaves going 24/7, which is destructive to this planet, it's destructive to our souls, or are they going to give time to things that are holy? That's all.
Two comments. With regard to the Beatitudes, the great theologian Charles Barkley said, "Blessed are the meek. They may inherit the earth, but they're never going to get the ball." That was a joke. Charles Barkley isn't never. If you got to explain it, never mind. But the other thing, you referenced the Sabbath. The Sabbath is the quintessential component in the concept of sustainability. The Sabbath, by the way, just doesn't apply. If you've ever read the Exodus text or the Deuteronomy text, it just doesn't apply to human beings. When you read the commandment in Exodus 20 or in Deuteronomy, whatever it is, 6 or 7 or 8, it says you, your household, meaning your wife and your children, your employees, and your farm animals. And there is a concept not only attending that, but attached to that is the notion of the sabbatical year. Do you know what the sabbatical year is? Every 7th year, and they're arguing about it right now in Israel because it's the 7th year according to how they calculate this stuff. It's a sabbatical year. You let the land lie fallow. Doc mentioned the term holy. The word in holy, anybody know what the word in Hebrew for holy is?
Kadosh.
You know what the root for Kodesh is? It doesn't mean holy in a pietistic way with halos over our heads. The word for holy in Hebrew means to distinguish or to separate. When we acknowledge the sanctity of the Sabbath or of another human being, we are acknowledging the uniqueness. So in Genesis 1:28, when God says, God blesses and sanctifies creation, God is basically saying to us through the text, this is unique. Don't screw it up. And to John's question about branding, I think the branding has been established 5,000 years ago. We just don't read it correctly and understand it appropriately. Yes, sir.
Well, hold on. Wait for the mic. Last question.
You don't necessarily think about. We're talking about the BSA and how can we get scouts to be the bastion of sustainability because we have so many numbers. Think of the number of people that are religious in the world. How can we get those people to act in sustainable manners? Religion has such a strong power over those people and an influence over those people. So kind of an extension from John's question of how to bring people in. How do we utilize those that are already a part of it to push sustainability out?
I have a thought on that because I'm new to this organization. I was not a scout, and so it's been a real honor and privilege to be here for the last couple of days. And John said something about not wanting to offend anyone. And I would say that my advice would be to go deeper in the religions of the people who are part of the Scouts, not to back away, to learn that kind of respect for the other that allows you to explore their faith and be respectful of it. And I'll give an example from medicine. For generations and hundreds of years, physicians, when they finished their training, took the Hippocratic Oath. Christian physicians did this, Jewish physicians did this, and they swore to Apollo and Asclepius and Hygeia, etc., a pantheon of Greek gods. And how did they do that? And do that and maintain the integrity of their faith? And that was always worked out that that recognizing there were other faiths on this planet, but to stand in front of a God and be responsible was infinitely better than someone who only answered to themselves, in other words, was their own God. And so I would urge the Scouts to not back away, but embrace the faith of those that are in their organization.
You know, I just wanted to say, you know, one of the things that we all have to do is listen to youth. In my experience in scouting, in the church, the youth readily accept truth. Older people tend to be ingrained in their ways and push it away. I think the challenge is to have youth lead in this movement, to push. You know, I sit around, I'm not just a national BSA guy. I got this job partially because I wanted it, because I was a scoutmaster in several different places. And I sit around in my roundtable meetings and I look at the guys next to me and I think, wow, that's an old guy. And thinking, this is one of the challenges, is to get that old guy next to me to really believe in it. And it
Like
really,
the styrofoam plate mom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and
exactly.
so I think in reality, when we start coming from the theological theory stuff to the physical, whatever word you used, the reality of it, we have to allow youth to lead and push those truths into the older generations.
Excellent conversation.
Can I conclude with one text?
Absolutely.
2 seconds. Deuteronomy 30:19. Listen to this and apply this text to what we've been doing here for the last 2 days. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today. I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life, that you and your descendants shall live. If that's not a text about sustainability and what we're doing, I don't know what is. Thank you all. John, thank you.
No, thank you.
To Marianne, to Marianne and to
Marianne and
Marianne.
I can't thank you each enough for joining this panel. This is the conversation that I had hoped for, but I'm also struck by how incredible scouting is. And you know, welcome to the campfire and welcome to the troop.
Thank
but you. There are few organizations that can. We have a very large tent, and our desire is to make it larger and to have everybody of faith, from Hindu to Muslim, and Rabbi Hyman's very involved in that. But also one thing that unifies us is service. And you know, the seven. It's amazing when you look at the number of hours that we just focus on here in the U.S., but globally. And
Millions.
the environment is one of the things that unifies us all, and or has the potential to. And so, the encouragement around faith. I mean, this is an integral part of who we are. And just talking about personal experience, my son, the first time he walked into a mosque was at the National Jamboree at Fort AP Hill in 2010.
Correct.
The first time that he participated in a Jewish service and learned was there in the exhibits, and they're taught to respect each other's faith, and to learn. When my son, who's been raised in a church, wanted to earn the Munson Award, at the 2013 Jamboree, because it was a neat medal, but it was also an opportunity for him to learn in his own faith, and that is the unique thing about scouting. And I think part of the conversation that has been missed in the national media about our membership, standards and all those things of the past couple of years, this battle we've gone through, is those of us in scouting know about how we treat each other with respect, and we have such great understanding of the different paths that we all walk, and I think that's what kind of bruised some of us up. And so your challenge to us to go deeper in faith and to embrace that, and I grow. I can't tell you how my faith was strengthened listening to President Beck talk about their philosophy, their theology that God's going to renew the earth. Because when I listen to the world of climatologists tell me how, and to hear Robert Swan talk about Antarctica and the fact that we may have lost the West Shelf, I can get very depressed and keep reading those climatology reports. But the word hope means something, and the fact that there's a theological belief inside the Mormon Church and with my brothers that God will renew the earth. And does that mean He supernaturally touches it, or we, through our service and messages of peace, are we the ones who restore the earth? So this is a critical part of our conversation. I can't thank you enough for making it part of this summit.
John.